2022 was filled with so many great films, and I already did my top 10 best movies of 2022 here on the channel. You guys can check that video out. It's the last video I uploaded. But right now we're going to get into my top 10 worst movies that I checked out in 2022. And while there were some disappointing installments to franchise that I love, like maybe Jurassic World Dominion, or even something that's part of a brand name like Marvel, like Morbius, those films are films I would watch 452 times before I watch any of the movies on my top 10 here on this list one more time. Thank you guys so much for clicking on this video, and I hope you guys enjoy the list. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to my video. We're going to jump straight into my top 10 worst movies of this year. But before we do so, I do want to take a moment and say what I said in the last video. I have been struggling from allergies over the course of the last few days. So if at any point I look like I'm dying over the course of the video, I probably cut out me having a sneezing attack, and my eyes may get puffy throughout the course of this video, as it did happen in the last video as well. With that said, I do want to mention really quickly though, of course, as usual, and I feel like everybody should know this, but it just feels like something you have to say in one of these videos. This is just my personal list of the top 10 worst movies I personally saw this year. These are the films that just did not work for me, just bored me to tears, and had nothing redeemable about them all that much for me. You know, there are obviously little elements here and there I might mention here in this video that I enjoyed about the films, but these are the films I disliked the most in the entire year. And I should mention before we get too far into this, actually, that every single one of these movies that I'm going to be talking about today was actually a movie I was sent a little bit early to check out as an early screener, which I just had to be honest when I was creating my list and I was trying to see what was going to come up as my top 10 worst. These were the top 10 worst. I did have a couple that I praised in my top 10 best, but yeah, you know, overall, sometimes when you're sent early screener for movies, they're not always the best. And in the case of this year, unfortunately, all 10 happen to be movies that I was sent early. But without further ado, let's get into my number 10 pick. And that movie is The Harrisville Haunting, The Real Conjuring House. This is a documentary film that I gave a fairly decent review to here on the channel. It's not the worst thing in the world in any way, shape, or form, but when I thought about the films that just bored me over the course of the year, this was definitely one of them that came into my head and ended up sitting at my number 10 spot. This movie essentially is a documentary where we follow a bunch of paranormal YouTubers who got together to make this, and they go to the actual Conjuring home that we've seen multiple films based on now at this point. And yeah, they go there and they try to capture some real life paranormal moments, some ghost moments. And I was all in when I heard about this, when I was sent this, when I got the poster. I thought this would be really, really cool. And as I was watching it, I was, really open to see where this was gonna go. I like a creepy documentary. I definitely like stuff with ghost tales and different things like that. So it seemed like it was gonna be something right up my alley. But ultimately, when I think back on the movie and just think about my experience of it, I was just bored throughout a big chunk of it, because while they do capture some things on screen that are pretty cool and paranormal, a lot of it is just honed in on for such a long period of time of them just trying to prove that it wasn't them that made that happen, that we end up spending 20-30 minute segments on the exact same thing that could just be a chair moving on screen. And while that might be a really big deal for them, and I can totally understand why they'd want to prove to us that that actually really happened, there's just plenty of times as a viewer where you're watching this and just checking the runtime, and that's why that movie is at my number 10 spot. Moving into the number 9 spot now, we have a Shudder film that I got sent early, and this film is called Mandrake, directed by Lynn Davison and starring people like Deidre Mullins, Paul Kennedy, and Derval Crotty. This is a film that I felt had a lot of potential. I believe it took place in Ireland and is essentially about a town where there's a woman who's kind of like known for some shady business. People don't really trust her there. Kids have gone missing in the past, and then some kids go missing in this film. And now they have to go and try to find where these kids are. There's a whole ritual element to it, kind of a witchcraft kind of element going on in this film. And as cool as that might sound, and kind of redundant in terms of, stuff we've seen before, it just ultimately just left me really bored. This was a movie that had nothing really new to do or say, in my opinion. The performances are pretty solid throughout the course of the film. I didn't find that the performances were necessarily bad, but there's nothing in the writing and in the cinematography and in the character work that really captivated me at all. And I just remember this, without a doubt, being one of my most bored experiences of watching a movie in 2022. Moving now into my number 8 spot, that is going to Black Warrant, directed by Tibor Takas and starring people like Cam Gigandet, Tom Berenger, and Helen Harrow. This is a story about a father and a son who are going after the same people. One's an assassin and one is out here going after the drug cartel. It turns out that the son is going after the drug cartel and the father is an assassin that's sent to go and kill the people that are part of the drug cartel. So when the son is thinking, oh my God, who's this assassin that's killing these drug cartel members that I'm going after? And then he finds out that it's his dad. You have this father-son reuniting kind of a storyline here, and overall, this movie was just bad. I found that the performances were not great here. The action is pretty straightforward. Feels like something you'd see out of a late 90s TV movie. The performances, for the most part, are really what took me out of it. I just found myself never really engaged. Cam Gigandet is meant to be somebody, an agent, a federal agent who works out of Mexico. So he's dealing with drug cartels and dealing with things like this all the time. And throughout the course of the film, he has to speak Spanish. And as you would expect, I didn't necessarily mind that he would have had an American accent. It would, kind of sound like somebody who Spanish is not their first language. I'm totally okay with that. But if you're somebody who is a federal agent who's based in Mexico and deals with the drug cartel and is running missions with a bunch of Spanish-speaking individuals and having to speak Spanish the entire time, you would kind of hope that he was a little bit more fluent in the language. And unfortunately, over the course of this movie, I just found myself laughing at the bad line delivery of the Spanish dialogue from Cam Gigandet. And just overall, that's just one thing. The action, the acting overall, the camera work, the overall look and feel and vibe of this film, it just took me out of it. I never got into the characters. I never got into the father-son reuniting story that we have going on here. I never really found it to be super engaging. I was rolling my eyes more often than not, and it was funny because I was watching this movie and my buddy Rob, who lives with me, walked out to the kitchen while I was watching it, and he was just laughing just from some of the dialogue he heard while he was passing by. And I just think that speaks to just how this movie just did not work, even for somebody just passing by. Moving on now to my number 7 pick is another documentary, this time around called Hunting Bigfoot. It's directed by Taylor Gooderson and focuses on a man named John Green, as well as a bunch of other individuals who are, well, as the title suggests, hunting Bigfoot. Except this is not what you would actually hope that it would be. Going into this, I was really excited because I like different myths and legends and different things like that, and kind of seeing the people who are obsessed with the discovery of different things like this, especially when it comes to various domestic legendary creatures like the Bigfoot or something like, the Loch Ness Monster. Except over the course of this documentary, we're really focusing more on this man who is so dedicated to the idea that Bigfoot is out there that he almost just trips over his own feet. And it's almost more of a documentary that's about how people lose their minds in search of Bigfoot. And while that also might sound interesting, it just never really goes strongly in either direction. It's a boring watch. I watched it with my buddy Rob and my friend Caleb, and we were laughing at it more often than not with just how ridiculous some of these people were in it. We were actually really interested when we all sat down to watch it to see if there was some sort of uncovering of Bigfoot. So when they were going out and searching and doing things, we were excited to see if this documentary brought anything new to light when it comes to the Bigfoot discovery, but ultimately just made all the people on screen look kind of weird and crazy. And there was times where John Green was getting buck-ass naked and we were wondering what the fuck is going on. Moving on now to my number 6 pick, which I was almost going to put this one a lot higher on the list in terms of closer to being the worst, but I just feel like this film at least has some merits that I can kind of praise. And this movie is called What Josiah Saw. It's currently on the streaming service Shudder, and it's directed by Vincent Granshaw and starring people like Robert Patrick, Nick Stahl, and Scott Hayes. All 3 fantastic actors. This film is really well shot. It's really well acted, and in so many ways, in terms of the musical composition, the overall look and feel and vibe of the film, there's a lot about the film that is very expertly put together. Except at its core, this is a movie just really about family trauma and specifically incest. This is a movie that has incest through and through because what Josiah saw was incest. He saw his kids getting it on, and this ended up leading to the wife committing suicide, and then There's a section of the film where Robert Patrick is trying to force one of his kids to masturbate in front of him. And then the movie ends with a brother and sister having sex, buck-ass naked, leading straight into the credits. I know that's spoilers for this movie, but that's pretty much what this movie was for me. It was just a big incest-filled, weird family trauma drama, and it just did not work for me in any way, shape, or form. And not even by the time we were 15-20 minutes in, I was already just kind of looking at the screen like, what am I watching? Moving on to my number 5 pick, which is an interesting one because shortly after I reviewed this one on my channel and gave it a fairly negative review, the godfather of movie reviews here on the channel, Chris Stuckman, came up and actually dropped a review for this movie, which surprised me because it was a significantly smaller film. And yeah, he ended up giving a really positive review. And the reasoning for that was because of the fact that the film was made by a very small group of people who directed, wrote, and starred in the film, and they made it on a shoestring budget. And on that level, I respect the film. However, I still don't like it. So my number 5 pick is a film called Hellbender, that you can find on Shudder, and is directed by John Adams, Zelda Adams, and Toby Poser, who all star in the film as well, and tells a story about a teenage girl who's starting to uncover her witchcraft roots as her mother has been keeping it a secret, and then eventually this young girl starts to really enjoy this power that she's uncovering and instead wants to try to control everything, including her mother. And while that sounds really interesting, because this film unfortunately is very low budget and doesn't have much to it, I just never really found myself invested in anything going on. And it's also just a really weird movie. There's a scene in the movie where the young girl is eating a worm at a certain point, and it kind of like triggers something in her, and she kind of has this weird interaction with a group of individuals who made her eat this worm. The film is just off-putting. It's weird. It just did not work for me. I wasn't into the performances. I wasn't into even really the characters. I wasn't into really much about this film. There's kind of a nice indie artsy vibe to the film to an extent in terms of its cinematography and maybe even its musical composition and ambient noises. But outside of that, I just was not really captivated by this movie in any way, shape, or form, and I never want to see it again. Moving on now to my number 4 pick, this is a film called Good Madam, which is an African horror film that I got to check out that came out this year after doing some festival circuits from the previous year. It came out in 2022, and yeah, you know, this film's directed by Jenna Kato Bass, and I'm not gonna butcher all the names of all the African actresses that are in this film. This film is a predominantly female cast and focuses on a mother and daughter that go to stay with her mother, who is also living with kind of an older woman that she takes care of. And some things start to get weird and crazy over the course of time in this house that all stems from the woman that the mother or the grandmother is caring for. And it just was dull. It was dull and boring outside of one moment that I can think of that was kind of eerie and creepy in the film. This was a movie that just did not work for me. I was never invested. I can remember so many times over the course of the film just being so pulled to just grab my phone and just, you know, twiddle my thumbs on my phone. And I do my best to never have that be the case when I'm watching a movie, especially if I'm going to review it. I feel like that's not a way to watch it. But I know when I have that pull to grab my phone or to just check how the runtime of the film is looking, yeah, the movie is obviously not working for me. And Good Madam, just the more I thought about it over the course of the year, it was just one that just left a sour taste in my mouth. Moving on now to a European film that actually premiered on Shudder that I got to check out. This film is called Dark Glasses. Directed by Dario Argento and starring people like Elenia Pastorelli, Asia Argento, and Andrea Gerpelli. This is a film about a woman who ends up going blind after an accident because she's a prostitute and there's a man out there trying to kill prostitutes. And the reason that this serial killer is trying to kill this specific prostitute is because she told him that he smells. That is not a joke. That is actually the reasoning in the film for why he tries to come and kill her. So he tries to run her off the road. She ends up causing an accident that kills the 2 parents in the other car. There ends up being a young boy who survives this crash. Now she's blind. She's a bumbling idiot. She's stumbling across the entire film. She ends up creating a bond, a weird bond with this young boy whose parents she murdered. And, or I guess it wasn't fully her fault, but kind of her fault based on how she interacted or kind of reacted in the car. And yeah, now the 2 of them are running from the serial killer throughout the course of the film. And that's pretty much it. Again, this is a movie about a woman who's being chased by a serial killer because she told him that he smells bad. let's move on. Number 2 is arguably the film that pissed me off the most, even if it's not the worst film here on this list, in my opinion. And it's a film called Where Are You? Directed by Valentina De Amicis and Riccardo Spinati. This film is just a clear case of just false advertisement. The poster for this film is just Anthony Hopkins' face plastered across the entire poster. That's it. There's nothing else to it. His face plastered across the poster. That is what this movie is in terms of its marketing. And there wasn't really much in the trailer, but the trailer also shows Anthony Hopkins. Anthony Hopkins genuinely is in about 3.5 minutes of screen time in this movie. It could be a little bit more, I could be wrong, but it's nowhere beyond 5 minutes at max. And I'm pretty sure it's on the lower end of it. He bookends the film, shows up at the very beginning, shows up at the very end, and shows up in the middle. But this film at its core is really about this artist, specifically a photographer, a very pretentious artist, very cocky guy, and his various lovers and his mismanaged life. And it focuses on how he's just kind of not mentally well, but he, is well off, and he is able to attract women. And there's just so much going on in this movie, but it all really kind of leaves nowhere. And there's so much of this film that doesn't even really have a narrative. A big chunk of this film is this artist, photographer being interviewed, and in between certain questions of this interview, we're just seeing splices of his life, and specifically a lot of romantic ones. And at times, this movie just completely stops for a few minutes at a time to just focus on this character and his love interest at the time, in slow motion, having a romantic or sensual or sexual scene of some sort. And in a lot of ways, just outside of the sexual part of it, you can take those slow-mo clips that are, well edited and, have some nice artsy cinematography to them. You can take those clips and literally add them as a backdrop for a medicine commercial while the narrator is telling you about all the bad side effects and all the ways you're going to die from the medicine, where, you have the couple in the back, the man picking up the woman and she's smiling and all that kind of stuff. And it's telling you about how you're going to have horrible diarrhea if you take this pill. Yeah, it feels a lot of times like a lot of the movie is just footage like that. We have a bunch of characters just doing romantic-esque things, and then there's some cheating, and there's some fighting, and some screaming, and a broken relationship, but there's no streamlined narrative. There's just crazy weirdness that happens at the end. And again, I still don't know what Anthony Hopkins' purpose was in this movie. I really don't know why he bookends this film, and I don't know why he's at the center of this film. I don't know what role he was supposed to play. And, he's given us still some good performances in his later years, even within recent years. And so it's, I went into this hopeful, and unfortunately this was just something that I almost want to say that Anthony Hopkins, owed somebody a debt or something, and that's why he was in this movie. It's a frustrating movie in the sense of just bad marketing, but just on its own, it's just bad. There's nothing to this movie. There's nothing narratively to this movie to even discuss, and that's why it's my number 2 pick. And now, moving on to the number 1 worst film of the year. You may think that there are some really good movies out there that were the worst movies of the year, and you might think, oh, that one disappointed me, so that's one of the worst movies of the year. But no. Have you seen All Jacked Up and Full of Worms? Directed by Alex Phillips and starring people like Philip Andre Brotello, Sammy Arichar, and Betsy Brown. All Jacked Up and Full of Worms essentially is about a group of people that over the course of the film start to meet one another and start to eat worms together. And they kind of use it as a metaphor for drugs. It's pretty much what it is, these worms and, people ingesting them with each other, and how kind of they're turned off by it at first, but then they end up trying it and they end up falling in love with it. It's definitely a metaphor for drugs, and in one way I thought it was interesting and kind of artsy, but at a certain point you're just like, what am I watching? The acting is bad, the dialogue is bad, the characters are bad. You're just watching people eat worms and get high off of it and having like crazy mushroom acid insanity trips, like a triple dose of acid. That's pretty much what these characters are getting from eating worms. And it gets even weirder and weirder near the end as they just start to go, it starts to get like into a dark, almost horror kind of level of these people are going through this insane thing, and you're just watching it and just going like, what the fuck is going on? And I like a good what the fuck is going on kind of movie that I can constantly be like, oh shit, oh damn, oh my God, I can't believe that's happening. But in the case of this movie, it's just you're looking at the screen like, what is going on? There's a guy with a really weird baby doll at a certain point that I believe he gets sexual with, and he's like feeding, and it's got like, it's just weird. This is a weird movie with just bad written all over it. This was just a movie I never want to watch ever again. I would never recommend this movie even on a it's so bad it's good level. When it comes to this movie, All Jacked Up and Full of Worms, I mean, the title tells you all about it, really, honestly. Like, that's what the movie's all about. It's just people getting jacked up on worms the entire movie. And I wish I could say that they took that interesting, like, drug metaphor kind of thing with the worms and built a story around it with some interesting characters and that it kind of goes somewhere cool. But it doesn't. And about, like, an hour into the movie, you're just like, we're literally watching people go from person to person to person to person. And they're just eating worms, and they're fighting each other for the worms, and they'll get crazy, or they'll get sexual and have romantic moments. And sometimes they just walk into a room with people that they've never met before, and they're like, hey, you want to like eat worms? And then the next scene is just these people who don't know each other are all best friends now, just tripping balls on worms. And I almost feel like the way I'm describing it is going to make some people want to go see it just because of how ridiculous it is. But I promise you, it's not good. Like, it's not so ridiculous that it's good. It's just bad, just really bad in my opinion. So yeah, guys, that's gonna be my top 10 worst of 2022. What are your top 10 worst of 2022? Have you seen any of these movies, and where do they rank on your list? Definitely want to hear what you guys have to say, so leave a comment down below, hit that like button, subscribe for more videos, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye-bye.